The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells is one of those books that everyone has heard of, but not everyone has read. And now, finally, I can count myself among those sainted few. This isn't a proper review because it feels weird to review a classic, so instead I'm just going to talk about it like a nerd. So what is it about? Well, aliens, specifically Martians, invade Earth and murk people. What makes this a classic? Aside from being old, I would say intent. Classics, in my humble opinion, are generally books that are trying to say something. They're trying to teach you something or make you think about something, as opposed to just straight up trying to entertain you. I'm not going to go into the realms of meaning and entertainment and how these translators art, because I have many thoughts on that subject, but they will have to wait for a different conversation another time. So War of the Worlds began life not as a book, whole and complete, but instead was serialised, that is published in sections over the course of several months in Pearson's magazine in the UK and the Cosmopolitan in the US, which has come a long way since 1897. It was then published as a complete volume in 1898 and since then has been reprinted many times and adapted into 7 films, various comic books, video games, stage plays, a musical album, and of course a radio drama. Well, many radio dramas. The most famous one, of course, was the one written and directed by Orson Welles, that some people believe to be an actual news broadcast about real aliens, which was no doubt aggravated by newspapers at the time, which clearly haven't changed at all since 1938. Now, before I start talking about the book, I would like to just say that I do not get on with Victorian literature on the whole. I find it too wordy and dense to fully enjoy, to the point where it more becomes a chore than fun, which is not what reading should be. Therefore, the style in which this book was written is not a style I generally get on with. That aside, it is a good book. It's actually quite surprising. I think we all know what happens, but the way in which a story is told is not typical of most fiction. Generally, we have a main character, or characters, who we follow because they do something important, as in most fiction, or because the story is their life. Especially in Dickens' work, a lot of his books are just about someone growing up. The main character in this, however, doesn't really do anything. He just doesn't die. And we know he doesn't die because the whole story is told retrospectively, with numerous references to information they find out after the aliens have been defeated. Spoiler alert, by the way. So there's no tension about whether or not the main character will survive. He isn't a hero, and this isn't an action book. He doesn't help find a weapon to see off the Martians or battle them in some manner. What he is an observer. He is the main character because he survives, and because he's uniquely placed to tell us the story with the moral and philosophical thought processes to support Wells' overall message. The main character is a writer, specifically of philosophical essays and articles and all that, so it makes sense that his written account, the book, should be eloquent, intelligent, and seamlessly weave through thought experiments and theories as to the aliens' intents and draw comparisons between us and them, which is the point of the book. He is also one of the few people to have had the opportunity to observe the aliens at close proximity without getting murked by them. The point is, this isn't a typical narrative, at least compared to modern books, because the narrator is passive. I mean, yes, he's active in his attempt to survive, for the most part, but passive in the overall plot. The entirety of the human race is passive in the overall plot, to be honest. We don't do anything to the aliens. They just die because they didn't wear face masks. We had nothing to do with it. And usually this would be considered a big no-no in fiction. You can't have characters just do nothing. Even in most survival fictional media, when the threat is too great for the characters to overcome, they do other stuff, like find survivors or rebuild civilization and all that. We have subplots that they can affect, like romances and family dramas and tragedy. But there's not a huge amount of that in this book. There are other characters, like the soldier he meets up and the curate, but they serve more as representations of how mankind as a whole is reacting to the threat of the aliens, as opposed to really being characters in and of themselves. We don't even know what their real names are, they're just referred to as like the soldier and the curate. I think most of the names we do get are actually when the main character is telling us what his brother is up to. And the brother meets Miss and Mrs. Doings and the mayor of some place and the captain of the HMS thingy. I've forgotten all the names, by the way, and I couldn't bother to go look them up. But they're in time that real names really apply to people. Either they die at the beginning, like the astronomer fellow, or they're just like random characters who don't really do anything of importance. You get far more humanity with the brother sections, which I suppose illustrates the two men's views of the world. The main character is concerned with introspection, and also with the reaction of mankind on the whole, whereas the brother is more concerned with individuals. But despite nothing much really happening, it is a good read. It is still suspenseful, even though we know the MC is going to be okay at the end. The aliens are foreboding, even if they aren't that mysterious, and we know they fail. The setting is brutal, to the point where there are dead bodies and skeletons just everywhere, and they become part of the background. And despite it taking place over a very small area of England, just around London, it feels vast. It is survival fiction done well, despite on paper not having the tension or mystery you generally need for it. And as a classic, it is a good choice to study. I only picked this up because the school at which I work studies this text as part of its curriculum, and I figured it would be a good idea for me to know what the heck they're talking about, in case I get asked questions. There is a lot you can say about it, from various perspectives. Science and religion are brought up a lot in the text, with speculation as to the evolution of the aliens, their anatomy and feeding habits, the alien weapons. But there are also numerous references to God and religion through the main character's musings and his summing up of the aliens' demise at the end, and also through the curate's reaction to the ordeal. The curate, a man of God who succumbs to basic and self-serving instincts, who cares more about feeding and watering himself than of helping others. You know, I get the impression if Ayn Rand wrote this, the curate would be the hero. We can look at angles of natural selection and evolution. It is implied that the Martians may once have been like us, but evolved to emphasise our more useful traits, such as the brain, the organ behind our ability to think and create, and our hands, the features that turn those thoughts into action. The Martians' food source is a creature similar to man. This same idea was used in Orwell's other work, Time Machine, where mankind splits into two: the Eloi, who are beautiful landowning creatures, a bit like Tolkien's elves, and the Morlocks, who live under the earth and look a bit like Tolkien's orcs. Make of that what you will. The Morlocks' food source are the Eloi, so perhaps on Mars the same thing happened. These two creatures evolved from the same base animal, and now one eats the other. Is this the fate of mankind? That some of us will destroy and consume the others? Is this where evolution is taking us? Who knows? Wells didn't know, but he had good theories about it. And of course the other reading, the main one really, is Colonialism and Imperialism. This was written and set during the times of the mighty British Empire, and at that time we were the world's superpower. We owned like a third of the earth. We had all the latest technology, many trains. We had an amazing navy. We had Queen Victoria on the throne. We saw something we liked, and we took it. Compare that with the Martians. They have all the latest technology and spaceships and sick weapons. Like the Brits, when we saw these lovely teas and spices in India, the Martians saw all of our lovely land and said, I like it. It's mine now. The Martians represent the Empire, and suddenly the Empire, or the Brits, were everyone they had ever colonised. They were the ones being crushed underfoot, like the ants trying to fight a man, a metaphor used several times in this book. And this isn't just speculation. Wells wants us to draw these comparisons between the Martians attacking us and man attacking man. With this quote I'm going to read now. And before we judge them, the Martians, too harshly, we must remember what ruthless and utter destruction our own species has wrought, not only upon animals, such as the vanished bison and the dodo, but upon its own inferior races. The Tasmanians, in spite of their human likeness, were entirely swept out of existence in a war of extermination waged by European immigrants in the space of 50 years. Are we such apostles of mercy as to complain if the Martians warred in the same spirit? Be aware that was written in, the 1890s. This is what makes this book a classic. Yes, it is entertaining, but more than that, Wells is trying to tell us something. All of his work is trying to tell us something. The Time Machine was telling us something. The Invisible Man was telling us something. The Island of Dr. Moreau was telling us something. In the same way that Pride and Prejudice was trying to do more than entertain us. Wuthering Heights was. Frankenstein was. Dickens... Well, I mean, Dickens never hid the fact he was trying to tell us about poorhouses and the shocking treatment of the underbelly of society. That is the essence of a classic. It's teaching us something. And that's why they're studied in the schools, because you can write some killer essays about it. This is actually why I find it a little strange that the film versions always change the time period in the War of the Worlds. In doing so, they remove the backdrop of the British Empire and with it the point of the aliens. And they often turn it into a mankind versus aliens film. At least that's the impression I got from what I saw of the Tom Cruise version. And look, I get it. The aliens look more impressive if they're destroying a skyscraper instead of a train station. But if you're going to take out the meaning or the point, you need to put something back in its place. I mean, yes, take out the colonialism if you will, but put something of substance back in. I mean, I think an environmentalism theme would work well, as the aliens' weapons comprise of like this poisonous gas and heat guns, which are perfect metaphors for global warming and pollution. And the aliens feed on humans by draining their blood and injecting it straight into their veins. And then discarding the shriveled husk of the person they just ate. Rather like what we are doing to the planet. There is a version of this actually set during the war, which I think sounds quite interesting because you could certainly transpose a lot of the sub-themes under the umbrella of warfare. So that is injecting meaning back in. But then again, you know, some people, they just want a good old action flick. And aliens make for a good enemy to band against. And yet, in my opinion, if that's all you want, War of the Worlds is not the source material for you. If for no other reason than its famous ending, which would not suit an action film. Unless, of course, the aliens died because someone coughed on them. So basically, at the end of the day, the message to take away is this. Bacteria kills. Get vaxxed or get axed. Goodbye.